Hello, and welcome to another episode of the William Branham Historical Research Podcast. I'm your host, John Collins, the author and founder of William Branham Historical Research at william-branham.org, and with me I have my very special guest, Raewyn Theobald, former message believer from New Zealand. Raewyn, it's so good to have you on here to tell your story about your experience in the message and what it's like going through the process of leaving the message. And as I understand it, you're in the mother church there, which is kind of a big deal. So I'm very excited to talk to you about what it's like being a message believer in New Zealand.
So just a bit about myself. Raewyn Theobald. I was Raewyn Cowley. So my mum, Shirley Cowley, was in the message, and that's how. So I was born into the message because my mum came to the message when not long after I was born. I'm the fourth of five children. So my mum was a message believer. My dad was not, and so I was raised in the message, and I did eventually leave when I was 34, which is about 22 years ago. But I feel as though only 4 years ago, once I discovered the help and the tools and the answers online, that I feel like I've only left in some ways 4 years ago. So physically 22 years ago I left, and more so 4 years ago, actually when my mum asked a question and I went and looked online and I found help that was there but wasn't previously there.
That's amazing to be out 22 years and then suddenly realize that mentally you're still in it. I actually just spoke with another person recently who, the same kind of thing, I don't know if it was 22 years, but they had not yet processed it, and mentally they had left, and in fact I believe that the person actually went back to the church for a period of time and noticed that things just weren't as they should be, and he finally escaped. So I'll be sharing that story here soon, hopefully. But
okay, nice.
So we connect a little bit, through the support groups, and I know a little bit about you in the church. But I'd like to hear a little bit more about the Mother Church. What was it like being in the Mother Church?
So I was raised in Gisborne Christian Fellowship. So the original pastor. There's only been the two pastors, so one of the sons is currently the pastor, but the original pastor, Reginald Searle, he heard a tape at some point and of the message, and toured around New Zealand and advertised meetings of the prophet, and people came, and he had the real tape. And so churches were set up around New Zealand because of Reg Searle's awakening, if you want. He was in a Baptist church and came, and we met in a hall. This is before my time, I think, or my mum wasn't quite there at this time. So we met in a hall before the church was built. Land was donated from a family, and the church is still where it is in Nelson Road. We had a convention. The church was actually pretty good as a child. I can remember really lots of happy times. And even some of those photos we do have of, it was a very positive, happy, there were big families, and we had fantastic conventions where people just gathered. And this was something I didn't know what to make of for a while. Why was it good and then did it go bad? And I could see how definitely it got bad, or just more difficult. But it was actually, they had hymns, beautiful hymns, the redemptional hymns. We had 3 meetings, Sunday tape night, and a Sunday service, the tape night, and then I'd have a prayer meeting, and those hymns. I still love those old hymns on the old rugged cross, blessed assurance, beautiful. And it was a pretty big church. And we hosted the Easter conventions for quite a while, and eventually the hall was built there. So it's about 1973, we had a convention at my papa, my grandfather, we called him Papa. He came to the Lord, so to speak, came to the message at a late age, and we had a convention in the cow sheds, he had a milking shed area. So because the church wasn't there yet, we had this, it's always spoken of fondly, at the 1973 convention, and John Albert Morris Smith was his name, but Papa's milking shed. So it was alive. People came to our convention. So it went across the country, and I guess it brought people out of churches into this new thing, okay? So I remember it quite fondly, and it was a good place for a time. And I suppose as a child, you don't pick up things too. But I do remember in the 90s, there was the splits come, like we had breakaways, the Perugia and the Seven Thunders, the Thunders, and you had to sort of, by that stage, my marriage had fallen apart, and it was, I couldn't understand why these doctrines were important. I didn't even know if God existed for me. I was so, just so broken from what was happening in my life with my husband. So the doctrines were just too complicated, basically. I was on survival. So it was a really good church. It seemed to be, and it was often known as the Searle Church.
It's so funny. You, the name almost sounded like you said Church of the Seals. I've realized it was the Church of the Searles, the name of the people, but Church of the Seals, and you're talking about the Seven Thunders and the Perugia and all these different doctrines. I just recently spoke with a minister who was in the message, and he left and he became a preacher, and we were talking about how difficult it was of salvation in this religion. In other churches, you leave with sort of a comfort that you know that God is there, God's protecting you, and you leave with an assurance from the church. But in the message, well, which doctrine is correct? Which church is correct? How do you understand salvation? You have to have this big, thick manuscript of just
absolutely
how in the world do I survive in this world to make it into the next? And by the end of it, you're so confused. What was that like for you as a teenager being in this church?
Yeah, I had very difficult teenage years. So probably I would say that I gave my heart to the Lord when I was 10, and I was baptized when I was 12. And I feel as though that's when I was saved. And later I now feel as though I've been twice saved. I've been saved by coming out of the message in that way. I feel as though God saved me that way, because it's so hard to see how deceptive it is, and we've got people we know still in it. So I feel like I've been saved twice. But I will say that in my teenage years, it was really hard. I stopped going to church probably when I was about 13, 14. So I've been baptized at 12. We were building a house, so my dad was building a house. So my brothers stopped going to church because they were helping Dad build a house. And my older sister, I don't think she made a commitment. She was a bit older because my mum has, when I was born, searched and found this church. So I only know the church, and my mum being, I guess, church religious, but she was a different outgoing person before she came to the church. So I stopped going to church probably about 13, 14. And I will say we went to public schools, just the normal local primary, local intermediate, and a local high school. All 5 of us went to the same schools, so we weren't homeschooled or anything. And so I was starting to go to the movies a little bit. It was very, very hard because you'd been so told it was so wrong, but I was just trying to figure things out. It was really scary to do anything because if you did anything, you didn't know if God would forgive you for some of these things. They just seemed big sins, going to church, going to the movies. But I did have a period where I wasn't going to church, and neither was, I'm not sure, I know my brothers went. I'm not sure about my younger sister. I don't think she was either. So that was very hard for Mum. Mum really struggled with her children not going to church. So we were always told huge emphasis on going to church. Church basically saved you. Going to church saved you. You risked your salvation by not attending. It was just, they meshed it together. Being saved was about going to church and keep coming to church. So my mum it was a very difficult time for my mum because she was very fragile during that time, and she needed to go to one of the deacons. Were very kind to Mum and had a farm, and Mum would go and recover so that she could come back and sort of parent, really. Dad was absent. He struggled. He was very anti the message in those teenage years. you had to make a choice between the two parents. They seemed to have two different values. Dad would even say, go and get a boyfriend, go to the movies. And Mum would say, wanting us to come to church, you're in danger of going to hell. She was quite blunt with some of the messages that she would say. So, so what brought me back to the Lord, there were two big traumatic things for me. One that was that I had a near-death accident when we were visiting the South Island, so I almost drowned, which brought me back to God. I'll go back to that. And I also got anorexia, which was very critical in this teenage time. So what brought me back to the Lord was we were down near Mount Cook, which is in the South Island. We're in the North Island of New Zealand, so we're having a tour, holiday, Mum, Dad, myself, and my younger sister. And so I was 15, my sister would have been 14. And while we were visiting this car park with ice, a slope, we were playing on it, sliding on quite a large 100 metres slope. I went right to the top, so did two other boys. We fell, this edge fell. We went into this icy pool where there was this waterfall. And it was very very cold, and we were injured and under this cave type area now, not knowing if it's going to collapse because we knew people were playing on it, lots of people. We didn't know if we'd been seen, so we managed. One boy helped me get out. I had a broken arm and shock. We were both pretty shocked. It was very, very freezing. And one of the boys actually drowned. I could see his body turning in the water. So he probably hit his head. So there was a boy drowning. Well, he wasn't struggling, but so in this cave area, I am not going to church, and I am not right with God, so to speak. So I just can't risk. I can't risk dying without. I put my life right with God. Quietly to myself, I asked God for another chance. And when I get out, I'll go back to church, because I felt that's what they kind of indicated was this place, how you got saved. So I asked, please, I don't want to die like this. I don't want to die today. When I get back to Gisborne, I'll come back to church. There was no warm feeling or anything, and it was just a commitment on my behalf, because I was so I guess so in need, and I couldn't risk it. So they pulled us out eventually, and it was a pretty big deal, especially the boy dying, unfortunately. So one was 16 and one was 14. I was 15. So I didn't actually know them, but so when we got back from our holiday, I did start to go back to church.
That would be really traumatic for anybody. I don't care if you were in the message or away from the message. Seeing somebody who died, that's very hard to go through. And you're right, many of the churches, they tell you that, maybe not openly, but some of them insinuate that if you don't go to church, you're doomed to hell. And they associate salvation with the church, and more specifically with the words of this man from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And the place that you go to hear this man from the 40s, 50s, and 60s is the church in many cases. So I'm assuming that, after going through this, you went back into the church and you dove in deeper into the religion and to the, this was a divine healing religion. So you dove into the aspects of that. What was that like after you made that transition back into the church? Well,
I felt like I'd given my word to God, and I kept going to church. As I said earlier, we had a really troubled patch in our family. The teenage years were very troubled. My brothers were having sort of car accident, drink driving, there was a bit of drugs, and there were outbursts of violence, and it was very scary for I was sort of just a quiet, good girl, if you want. And I'm not saying I was perfect, but I was a good, quiet girl. So it was very scary. And my parents had some very turbulent occasion events. As I said, Mum was very fragile. She would go away to recover and come back. And we were always told that if Dad came to church, this is just touching back on that emphasis of church, is our family would be okay. if Dad came to church, it would fix everything. So we seemed to have all these troubles, and they didn't seem to have any answers. And Mum did have, I will say, there was an elder in the church that Mum would go to for prayer. Beautiful people that would just sustain Mum enough to bring so she could come back. And my auntie was quite a support too. Mum's got 2 sisters, but the auntie that's in the church would try and help Mum because it was tough, these 5 kids. Anyway, so as a result, when I was 17, near the end of high school, I developed anorexia. I didn't know what it was, but and I just started to control what I ate. I hadn't linked it back to another event of stuff. So bad stuff had happened in our home, and I didn't know how to process that. I didn't know how to tell someone. Nobody asked me the right questions. It was a big taboo subject in the Bible. It's in the Bible, all right, but it's just I knew that this big angry God, which is what they were sort of presenting all the time, there was just no way to process what had happened. But I just knew it was bad, it was wrong, and it shouldn't happen. And I felt different. But I hadn't actually made the link between the eating disorder. So the eating disorder was just in some ways perfect because it ticked all these little boxes. It just happened. There was a little bit of a group of girls at school, but it kind of just helped me I was basically crying for help. It was a cry for help. In this troubled patch, I was able to control something, which is my eating. I was angry with my mum. I realised all of this later. I was angry with mum, probably because she was kind of God. Not that she was God, sorry, I shouldn't say it like that. But she represented God. My father was too distant to interact with, so to speak. But so somehow I was very angry with mum, and I knew it was hurting her. And she made huge efforts to keep me to eat. She made a huge effort to bring me back to function, so to speak. So I was still working. I would have had my first job at the Maori Fair. She would come to the lunchtime, so I couldn't throw up my food. I could go back to work, so it was very annoying because I had to. So Mum kind of just made herself a problem to me. So we realised it sort of just crept up, and it was also I hated myself because of what had happened, and I just felt different. And if anybody knew what had happened, they would never be able to love me. And people only love me because they don't know. So I took it all internalized. I kind of tried to save the family by not telling anybody. So it was just this bad stuff had happened. I didn't know how to process. Nobody asked me the right questions, and I needed to trust enough to share too. So, and I didn't know how that stuff affects you, how bad it is. I found out as you get that you have to verbalize it. You have to get counselling. You cannot keep those secrets without it harming you. So I didn't know that it was linked to the eating disorder. I just knew there's something wrong with me, and my thinking was really bad. In terms of, I don't think I wanted to kill myself. I just hated myself. I didn't know why. Okay, and so it came to a head where my father and my mother sort of sat me down, which was probably pretty unusual, and I had to make a choice on how to get rid of. So my dad wanted me to go to the doctor and go to the psychiatrist. There was an appointment booked. My mum was hardcore into, this is a demon, this is how you can go to the psychiatrist, but it's not going to make you well. She was quite blunt. She didn't say that in front of Dad probably, but she was quite blunt that that's not going to work, Raewyn, but this will. So, and so how we knew what it was, I must say, just before I come back onto my answer there, on my choice, a lady in the church gave Mum a book. It was, I think it was called Starving for Attention or something. It was a pastor's daughter's story, and her story, and it was so helpful. I've got to say the relief when I was given the book, which helped me, and it sort of gave me more ideas too. But the relief of being diagnosed with what it was. Oh, this is what it is. Thank you. It was such a relief to know what it was, because I knew there was something wrong with me, and I was too scared to trust. I thought I was just going crazy. because I hadn't made the link with what had happened, the trauma, so to speak. And I was still going to church when I got pretty thin, going to conventions and stuff. We might actually have some photos here. I was pretty thin, and I didn't like it that I was hurting Mum, but I just couldn't help it. This was just how it was it was being expressed. I would say there was just no way to express this. I was trying to tell them something's gone wrong here. I don't know what's happened, and I don't even know. It's big bad. I couldn't even put words around, because we didn't give people words back then. I just knew it was bad, very, very bad, and God did not like this. It's in the Bible, and this big angry God just doesn't like this. So I internalized it, and I kind of thought, well, unfortunately, boys get believed, but girls don't. So there was that. So it just got internalized, and it turned into this eating disorder. It kind of ticked a lot of boxes. It gave me some control over what I couldn't control in the home too. So I had to make this choice. So not unfortunately, but I chose what was the safer for me. Why I didn't choose the psychiatrist, the doctor, because my lack of trust with the outside of the message and doctors and anything, I thought I'd be banging on a glass window door. I'm okay now. I'm well. You've fixed me. I know what it is. I'm okay now. And they wouldn't let me out. So my mistrust and terrified of not being able to be well and say, let me out somehow, I thought that they wouldn't believe me I'm okay. I took the other option, which is to come forward for prayer. So Reg Searle, my pastor, said, I needed to prepare myself for a week, which whatever that means. And my position with God was, he was just this big, scary God, and I was unclean, and I didn't even know if he cared. I thought I was unlovable. So, but that was the better of the two choices. So I went forward for prayer at the end of this particular service. I don't remember doing any prayer preparation, because I was just in a really low place. God was not friendly and good. So they laid hands on me and delivered me of this evil spirit. Raewyn's come forward for prayer. She's got an eating disorder. So it was this big kind of embarrassing, okay. And so I'm supposed to be better, just like that. And that's one thing they did. They put that healing back on you. So I wasn't better. Nothing had changed other than everybody now knows, and I'm supposed to be better. So the worst part about that part was that I had to fake a healing, so to speak. I'm supposed to now eat. I'm supposed to put on weight. I hadn't got better. I needed to share what had happened is what was going to heal me, but I didn't know that either. And I don't even know it's connected to I just know something's gone very wrong in my head. And I knew there was something wrong with me, but and I didn't know how to fix it. So I just stumbled along after that. I remember my younger sister catching me throwing up food in the shower, because I'm trying not to eat as much food still, trying to get away with it somehow. And she must have heard me, and she caught me, and she said she was going to tell Mum. And I remember begging her. That was one of my low patches, begging her, please don't tell Mum. So that was now the pressure, and I've got to say the stress. I'm supposed to be well. I wasn't well. So I sort of just limped along. I can't remember, but anyway, how I did get well, I met my husband, and I shared my story, and I told him what had happened. And what a hero he was. He listened. He was angry. Thank you. And partly why I loved him, because he was angry on my behalf. I said, no, let's not do it. He just needed to be angry. And he shared his story. He had a very troubled upbringing too, different because he wasn't in the message. So I shared my story, and even Mum said, man, you seem to get better when you got married. So it was just by sharing. And then I eventually, as a bit later after my marriage ends, I do get counselling for things that are these sort of things. But it was enough just to share my story with him, and just to be believed. I think the fact that he was angry, that just seemed to unlock something there. Okay, so and like I said, I was reluctant to get any counselling ever because I'm still in the message for a good. I don't leave till I'm 34, and I got married when I was 19, and then 1 year later, almost on our anniversary, we have our son, and so I'm 20. He's 1 month old at my 21st, so I'm almost 21 then. So, but yeah, sharing my story with my husband at the time is what broke that eating disorder.
You know, it's really difficult for children in this to be torn between having to have the positive confession that, you know, you're sick, but I have to confess that I'm not. I have to pretend that I'm not. It turns into a make-believe game in many cases. But for me, my mother was dreadfully ill for a large part of my childhood. In fact, she was bedridden for most of my high school. And I've locked most of those memories away, but I do remember her going through the healing lines and, you know, being prayed for. And then the quote is, "Sister, go home and accept your healing. God has healed you." Well, then you go home and you watch the thing continue, the illness continue. And you're wrestling with it because if you actually listen to the content of the sermons, they're telling you that the reason people don't get healed is because their lack of faith or their unbelief. And then unbelief is sin, so therefore you make the leap to you're a sinner because you don't believe because you're sick. And all of the burden of this is on your shoulders. I can't even imagine what it would be like, you know, going through what you went through. And then, you know, going through that and then getting married, I'm sure that was a difficult transition.
The only way you got out of, back then, the only way you left your home, so to speak, in the message, you got married. We weren't really encouraged to go flatting, so you stayed under your father's household. Even though my father wasn't in the message, so to speak, there was still that sort of expectation. So part of it was to get married. I was keen to get married and have children, and I thought things would be better. Great, because I felt like it had been a pretty troubled home. As I often say, it was an unsafe, unhappy home, especially those teenage years. So I meet my husband. He's basically my hero because he's just, I guess, that response. And he had a very troubled background. So he wasn't in the message. He wasn't born in the message. So he had a great conversion at one of those Easter conventions. And so my mum took a shine to him. She did take a shine to people that sort of the troubled, down and out type. And so I suppose I took a risk by marrying someone who wasn't raised in the message. But like I said, I felt like I was marrying my hero at the time. Okay, unfortunately, he did become my enemy pretty quickly. So we got married, and he had a great conversion. And so we didn't even hold hands. So he was very respectful like that. And I took it seriously. You get one chance pretty much to get married. And they told us, you prepare yourself for marriage, you go and put things right. So I went and put things right with that family member so I went and said, I forgive you, and And I did my very best to put things right, because they did say that it was always sort of preached, and I think it's in the message a lot, if a woman hasn't declared something, she can be put away, or the husband has a right to divorce her because they haven't told all their story of, things that have happened. So I was very careful to do everything they told me to do before you got married, okay? And we did not even hold hands. We talked and shared, but no, we kept it very respectful. No kiss, nothing. Very respectful. And like I said, it was just incredibly. So we were only engaged for 3 months, and they got married in November, and then a year later we have our first son. Well, we've only got one son, sorry, our son. And a lot goes wrong really quickly, because 18 months later we have our daughter. So my husband was at church as we dedicate our son, And 18 months later, he's not standing at the front of the church with me as I dedicate our daughter. It's all happened really quickly. And so I was in shock for some of that because I didn't know what had happened, because we were really on track there. So for a long time, a little bit into this, we separated when I was 23, and by then I have a two-year-old son and an 8-month-old daughter. And so we were married together for just over 3 years. We didn't actually get divorced till about 20 years later. He didn't want to get a divorce, and I couldn't kind of get one. So we were divorce was this big bad thing, and women weren't supposed to go and get one, and even if we were separated that long. So it was like he needed to divorce me. You've done that, so I'll get to what happened to the marriage. So it was great. And then something happened and I didn't know what had happened. It was as if, as we are facing each other talking, John, you're facing me, we're talking to each other. It was as if all of a sudden you turned your back and I'm talking to you still, but you've got your back to me. Something shifted suddenly in there and I didn't know what it was. And he turned back he stopped coming to church. He had started to have an affair. He even has another baby in the same year as our daughter's born, that 1990. So there's a bit of a crossover with the pregnancy. So I just didn't know what had happened. And I knew our marriage was falling apart, and so soon. And it was as if, I've got my hand up here, as if you're trying to carry sand in your hand and it's slipping. Something very precious was slipping away. I took this one time to get married. You don't get any more chance. I'm a woman. You only get one shot in the message, pretty much.
Yeah, that's about right. At least if you're a woman in the message, it's one shot, or the rest of your life is ruined, basically, if you're female. So you mentioned that he turned on you. He suddenly changed. Are you aware what caused that change?
So what has happened is he and my cousin have gone to, you could take questions and go to the office to ask questions, and the deacons were there as well. And so my husband had asked questions. I've checked with him later, and he said it was about salvation. So the pastor was saying, so yes, I have saved all these people, meaning the congregation. And my husband said, so you're God, are you? And he said he got so angry that he asked the deacons to escort my cousin and my husband out of the office. Now, when I pestered my cousin, this is what my cousin said. For a long time, he wouldn't tell me for a bit. I pestered him. I need to know, please tell me. He said, you won't believe me. I said, please. So my cousin told me this conversation of what happened way back. It was a conversation we had very near the time we separated, because my husband wouldn't he just couldn't converse. He was gone, basically, gone. So this conversation happened right near the time, nearer, that they were escorted. Two of the sons escorted out, but one of the deacons, who wasn't one of the sons, refused to escort them out. It's the same deacon that had the farm that used to take Mum to recover. So they had these questions. I don't know what my cousin's questions were, but they were had scheduled a time, asked some questions, and the pastor got really, really angry.
I think that's one of the biggest problems in this message, right? If you ask a question, they see it as a threat, and then entire families are cut off just simply by asking a question. I know whenever I asked my grandfather the questions that I ask, and they were fairly simple questions, I was obviously excommunicated at that point. But what was interesting is he had never spoken to my wife or my children, and we were all cast out of the church, and we were turned over for Satan for the destruction of our flesh, I think is how they phrase it. But he had never spoken to my wife. She was just doomed to hell because I asked the question.
Yes. So, yes, that was really challenging to ask questions. You just, basically, you had to just only believe. So the other thing I didn't know that piece for quite a while. So basically my husband, he changed, and then I knew, obviously I'm aware our marriage is on the rocks. He is leaving. He is disconnected from us in that short time between the two children being born. We actually lost another baby in this early separation time as well. But so I don't know why he's changed, not till after he's left for a bit. So our pastor doesn't know how to fix, like with Mum, our problems. He doesn't really know how to help with problems like that, family problems. I was probably one of the first people to have a marriage breakup in our church. So it was quite unusual, so to speak. And so I went to the elder that my mum used to go to get prayer and support through, the same person, the same couple. So what do? I think he's having an affair. There would be a phone call and then he'd leave. He was still coming home every night, but very late. And he just was different and distant. And this girl was hanging around all the time. So this elder told me what to do: go and confront her, tell her you're trying to save your marriage. So she was only probably about 19, and we were about 22, 23 when he actually left. So we were all pretty young. So anyway, this girl, she was just a bit younger than us. So anyway, he's hanging out with this girl. People are telling me that. So I remember being pretty much pregnant with our daughter, 9 months pregnant. So that would be May when she's born, and we haven't moved to our home. We're renting, so I know which house we're at. We're about to leave because she was born a day after we moved. So I go and confront. She comes. I went to her home. This is what the elder told me what to do, and I'm so grateful. It was great advice to confront it, and it was hard to do. I was really scared, but my marriage was at stake, and I knew I had to look my children in the eye one day. They were only little toddlers at this stage, or one wasn't even born. So I needed. This is really important. I knew something was at stake here. So I confronted, but she wasn't home. So she got home and then came back to our house, and my husband wasn't home. So she came onto my doorstep. I remember being very, very pregnant, and she basically stood at the door and looked me straight in the eye and said, "How dare I go round to your house, and you're only married by a piece of paper. And so, that's my husband's name, he will see whoever he wants to see." So she was just really sassy. And I remember I had nothing to say. She said, "We're only married by a piece of paper." So I told my husband what had happened and he was mad with me because I had upset his friend. So there was a patch there. And then we moved house because our daughter's born a day after we moved. So I know and she just wouldn't go away. He denied it. And I was going crazy because I didn't have proof he was having an affair, and they were actually having a baby. She carried really small. So later that year, I had a baby in May, and they had a baby in November. But they whāngai her out, adopted to, family friends. So, and they stayed together, had another one. Actually, he goes on to have 7 more children with different, 2 different women. So anyway, I've confronted them, and I just had to wait. And there's a scripture in Ephesians. It says, "Having done all to stand therefore." And he just denied it. I couldn't prove it. It continued. He just wouldn't leave, and I couldn't leave him because what if he's being set up? What if he really was innocent? So that was a really dangerous time because it was true. And it came to the family that adopted that little child came in. One day about 2 years after the little child's about 2, came to my doorstep and said, "Hey, can we have some photos with your children? Because they're a sibling." I said, "Wow, it is true." So it came to light. But he denied it to my face. And I just hadn't come across that. He had no interest in saving this marriage. He had changed. And what had changed is that bit in the office. But he never came home from those questions in the office and said, "This has happened." I just had no knowledge of it. I don't know what I would have done because I was hardcore into the message. I really believed it. And so I don't know what it would have done. He didn't give us a chance. So that was the piece I didn't have. I just knew he changed. He was lying. He was out. He would come home. And then he was away one night. That was the night that their child was born. He was actually there supporting the couple because they're going to give it to family friends that couldn't have children. So it all comes out to later, but I don't know. And later, then after, so we have our baby in May. Their child's born in December. And then they he leaves in January. So that's when I'm 23, a 2-year-old and an 8-month-old. So I don't know what's gone wrong, and I'm in some sort of shock. And for a long time, I just couldn't believe it. I really wanted more children, and this took me a very long time to accept, because I really believed you should have children with your husband. And there's another scripture. It's Rachel is talking to Jacob in Genesis, and she says, "Give me children or I'll die." And oh man, I could understand that. How they had the negative talk that they've said of to women in the message. You absorb all that. What I seemed to pick up was that the only worth woman had in the message is to have children. To be a mother was like, oh, it gave you value and worth. And to have lots of children was even better. So I had this awareness, this concept that to be valuable and my worth wasn't having children. So I needed more children. And I just felt like 2 wasn't enough to change the world, But I really believed that you have to have them with your husband. So I had this problem. He just wouldn't die. So I couldn't, no, I shouldn't say he wouldn't die. But so I was trapped in this. You've got this one shot. I've used my one card. I believed that. And it wasn't taken lightly. I fought to save that. I did what the elder said to do. I'm glad for that advice. And we hadn't. This is why I was so angry with God. I was just, because I had done what they said to do. Before you get married, you do this. You don't what we would say, hanky-panky, keep it clean, keep it pure, the engagement. I'd put things right. That I'd been very careful to prepare myself for marriage. Why had this gone wrong? What had happened? And I was enraged. I was in a rage. For a long time, I was very, very angry. And I was a good Christian girl going to church, still in the message church. How do you process this now? So like I said earlier, how do you process that eating disorder, which was a result of that other trauma? But how do I process this? He's left me. It's so personal. He doesn't want to be with me. And actually our children too.
I can't even imagine what it would be like as a woman. You're right. The women get one chance, and it's this weird double standard. The men, in some churches in the message, the men can get married again, because in some versions of William Branham's stage persona, the men could again. And, obviously he helped his brothers get married several times. I can't even imagine what it would be like to be a woman and then go through something like you did, where there was a really bad situation where it's not your fault. You're trapped into this life that you didn't want, and a person went astray. I can't even imagine what would be like to go through that. What was it that was the turning point for you? What made you decide to, leave the message that you had been part of for so long?
So I stayed for probably another 11 years, and I did get counselling in that time, and I left because of 3 reasons, although I didn't know. It was sort of a merge of these 3 reasons. One of the reasons, I'm sitting in church and they shouted a lot at us. That was one of the things that's just, they shout in the sermons. And my son is 12 and my daughter's 11, because it's right near the end when we leave. And they're talking about, be ye separate from the world, even if it's family, be ye separate from the world. And during this sermon, my son turns to me and whispers and said, "Mum, do they mean so-and-so?" And he said his cousin's name, because he'd been was playing with his 13-year-old cousin, who was my older sister's child, who is not in the message. And I remember being so shocked at the time, thinking, oh, wow, they're actually listening to this. So I probably just whispered and said, "I'll tell you later," So I realised they were listening to this. That was kind of a bit of a wake-up call. And also I had, this is what really probably bothered me, is that in the message they claim that you can only be saved from being in the message, the bride, the message. That's how you're saved. And I was aware that obviously I was born into this, and I was sort of aware that I don't know if I would have found this if I wasn't born into this. I was aware it was very strange, especially the serpent seed. I'm thinking, oh, you got to be careful when you share that one. You have to sort of prepare people for that one and you don't always share it straight up because it was so weird. I realized that the Eve sleeping with the serpent was very unusual. Even though I could see in the message, it kind of made sense. So it was a tricky one there. But anyway, so I was aware that I don't know if I would have chosen this. I've born into this, and that's how I know about it. And I'd met so many good people through Play Centre, I put my children into the local Christian school, which was, I consider it one of my, apart from leaving the message, that was the second best decision, was putting my children into the school. I actually teach there now. So that was so that they could be part of the Christian community, which helped heal. And so we were aware of people that followed Jesus, and they seemed free and kind and loving. And so that was a bit of a mystery because they were supposed to be all hostile, and no, they didn't have any truth outside of our church.
So if you could list one doctrine that you would say was the most harmful or destructive, the one that impacted your life the most, what would you say would be that one doctrine?
I would say that because of the way that they spoke about women, they seemed to the message that we were deceived. We deceived, and because of Adam wasn't deceived, but Eve was. So that we were easily deceived as women, and so it gives you that you get this feeling that you're never going to be able to discern things yourself. You're never going to be able to find truth. So I've always been thinking I'll never find the truth of things because I'm a woman. And I'll need a man that'll have to show me the way. And I'll have to check what I have got, the truth that I feel I've found, with a man. So that self-doubt of, because I'm a woman, I'm not going to discern, I'm not going to find the truth. And that inside you self-doubt, because you're never going to get to the truth because you're a woman. So that's what they kept saying. That somehow I absorbed that. And just one more. This is where I would say they taught us that the Bible, there was something wrong with the Bible. It doesn't work anymore on its own. And Jesus isn't enough. They taught us that. So my first introduction to Christianity was based on that. There's something wrong with the Bible. You're going to need an extra message. And Jesus isn't enough to save you. He worked perfectly fine up to when Brother Branham comes along. Now, you need something more to be saved. That is probably, you believe it's the first introduction, and it is so hard to unpack because they make it fit. It does fit when you're in there, the scriptures that they sort of fit. So probably the fact that they shouted at me as a woman, they shouted, and the fact that they told me that I can't discern properly because I'm a woman and I am easily led, that they're putting that on women. That was probably the most harmful, because on top of all the other trauma and stuff, and the fact that they tell you that there's something wrong with the Bible, all of a sudden now, unlucky us basically, we're going to need something more to add to the Bible, basically the voice of God, all of that second Bible, and we're going to need something extra to Jesus to be saved. That introduced to you from such a young age is so damaging, because that's your first introduction, that's what I feel, those two things.
I think one of the biggest things for me was realizing that they had essentially taken the role of the Holy Spirit and they had removed it from the Holy Spirit and given it to either William Branham or the preachers or the message in general. Where the Bible says the Holy Spirit will lead you and guide you into all truth, they don't want you to be led and guided by the Holy Spirit. You have to be led and guided by these men. And once you realize they're leading you astray, it turns really problematic. For me, this was horrific what they had done, because they had usurped the authority of the Holy Spirit.
Yes. So what really troubled me, and I would say it like that in the message there, God is too small. Your God is too small. Their God saves only those in the message, this narrow way. And I was wanting to give my heart to a God, because I took that, I'm leading my children somewhere. I took that really with such, I didn't take it lightly. I need to really believe this. I'm leading my children. I wanted to give my heart to a God fully. And I can't give my heart to a God that doesn't make salvation open and free to all. You mean to tell me that that people across this whole wide world are only saved if they find the message across the whole world and are saved by following this prophet? That's the only way they're saved. It was narrowed down, and all these good people. So that unfairness was what troubled me. I don't want to give my heart to a God that's not fair. It needs to be open up to everybody. I'm only here probably because I'm born into it. And I felt like I was turning down salvation for me, risking it, if you want, to go and find and see. I want that God that's bigger and open to all. I can't give my heart to that God. And that's why I say in the message, their God is too small.
I remember those feelings that you described whenever we started attending our first church. And in fact, we were at a restaurant and my wife suddenly looked around, table to table, and then she suddenly burst out laughing. I'm like, what's so funny? And she says, have you noticed? Look around us. And I looked around and there's just people, Sunday afternoon, we're having dinner. And she said, the people of God, the Church of God, has just grown by several million people because we were so isolationist, right?
Once I got a revelation of that gospel, you can't make a mistake there. That's the true Christianity. The signs and wonders are not supposed to be the emphasis, and they're supposed to be warning. They're a warning as well. In Matthew 24, we're warned about them. There'll be some good ones out there. Be careful. And then the Galatians 2, where he's fascinated with visions and a false humility. I felt like that fitted him too. So those really helped me to see it clearly. But it hasn't been easy to see it. It's very deceptive, the message. Like I said, very smooth. It's very smooth.
We were misled to believe, because he would make these boisterous claims. He would say, I taught the same gospel I taught the same message that Paul taught, and we're resting on that, right? Well, you don't critically think to examine, well, did he actually do it? And that was eye-opening when I started going through that, realizing that it's not even the same religion as Paul had, to be quite blunt. So this has been great. I really enjoy our conversation. I want to know, though, if you had something that you could say to your former self, way back whenever you were in the message, what would you tell yourself?
What would I tell myself when I first left? So I'm 34 with a 12-year-old and an 11-year-old, and there's so few answers. I would say, good girl, you have done the right thing. You don't know it yet, but you've turned down the false gospel of the message. You've done the right thing. And I know there's so few answers right now, but the answers will come. The answers will come. You have done the right thing. And you will look back later, not too long later, but certainly now, 22 years later, and you will say that is the bravest decision you have ever done, is to leave the message with so few answers. You have done the right thing. And I would say you will find the Jesus that you're looking for, the Jesus that wrote in the sand, the merciful Jesus, the Jesus that was kind to women, the Jesus that understood why she was in that situation, and still said, go and sin no more. You will find the Jesus that you're looking for. You will find the big God that you are looking for.
You are brave, and I can see that you're very grateful that your faith in God has survived and your children are doing well, and there's just nothing like being able to be free now with your children.
Yes, exactly.
I'm so glad you decided to share your story with us. There's several people who watch these who are in a similar situation. they're desperately wanting help and they don't know how to get it. And some of the people are in the message, but I would say that a majority of the people who are seeking help have left, but they're in this weird state of limbo like you described, where they're carrying the weights that the message has placed on their shoulders, and they'll carry them forever until they can unravel what this message did to their head. So I would say you're very brave. You have escaped. It's a lot of work leaving the message, but it sounds like you've done your work.
Thank you, John. I'm just so grateful to have this opportunity, because I've often wondered, how can I help other people? I've also wanted to have conversations that might help me, but I appreciate the work you're doing. You're doing a great work out there. And for people that are far away like me in New Zealand, and that don't have access to people that have come out and are willing to talk, you are doing great work, your team of people, and I really appreciate that what you've put online and the time, and a big thank you to you, and go well. Keep going and go well. Thank you very much. God bless.
Thank you. So glad to have you. If you've enjoyed our show and you want more information, you can check us out on the web. You can find us at william-branham.org. For an overview of the historical research of William Branham and the healing revivals, read Preacher Behind the White Hoods, a critical examination of William Branham and his message, available on Amazon, Kindle, and Audible.